Admiral Elara Kane stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, gazing out at the endless void of space. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the control panel, the quiet hum of the ship's engines the only sound in the sterile room. The galaxy had plunged into darkness long before Earth's last hope took flight. The Zorath Dominion, alien conquerors with a cruel grasp, had extinguished the flames of countless civilizations, and their reign of terror seemed unstoppable. For years, humanity had been a whisper, a dying ember. Now, it was the spark of something much greater. The Eclipse and its fleet of human survivors were all that remained of Earth's military might. But there were no victories to be celebrated, no cheers of triumph. Instead, there was silence, an uneasy calm before the storm. The humans had barely begun to rebuild their strength when the Zorath turned their sights on the galaxy's forgotten corners, where hope still lingered in the hearts of the oppressed. "This is our chance," Kane muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. "We have to show them they're not alone, that there's something worth fighting for." Her second-in-command, Commander Tristan Vale, approached, his face hardened by years of conflict. "We're not ready, Admiral. We don't have the fleet, the firepower. Hell, we don't even have enough supplies to last another month." Kane's gaze never wavered from the starfield before her. She knew the risks, knew the stakes. But if there was one thing she had learned since the fall of Earth, it was that hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. "We don't need firepower," she said, her voice low but fierce. "We need hearts and minds. We need to show the galaxy that we're not just surviving. We're ready to fight back." Tristan hesitated, then nodded. "A strike against a Zorath outpost. It's a long shot, but if it works, we could rally the resistance. Show them we're still a force to be reckoned with." Kane turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "We don't have time for long shots, Commander. We do this now, or we lose everything." The mission was set in motion. The Zorath outpost was located on a small, barren moon orbiting a gas giant in the outskirts of the quadrant. To the untrained eye, it appeared abandoned, a mere collection of rusting structures and dormant technology. But Kane knew better. The Zorath were not known for leaving things to chance. They had eyes everywhere. The Eclipse dropped out of hyperspace with deadly precision, its cloaking systems active to avoid detection. The fleet, a motley collection of human ships, followed closely behind. Each vessel bore the scars of countless battles, burnt hulls, patched-up engines, and weapons that had seen more than their fair share of conflict. Yet they moved with a quiet grace, a unity forged through necessity. As the fleet closed in on the outpost, Kane could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. This mission would be the first strike in a war that could either ignite the flame of rebellion or snuff it out forever. The odds were slim, the risks monumental, but Kane didn't flinch. "We hit them fast," Kane ordered. "Take out their communication relays first. Then we cripple their defense systems. No one gets a chance to call for reinforcements." The fleet descended toward the moon, their engines thrumming with anticipation. The Eclipse dropped to the surface with a controlled descent, landing just outside the outpost perimeter. Kane, fully suited in combat armor, turned to her crew. "This is it. Keep your heads on a swivel, stay sharp. We're not just taking this place. We're sending a message." The door hissed open, and Kane led the way, her pulse racing with a mix of adrenaline and resolve. Every step was a reminder of what was at stake, not just the survival of humanity, but the chance to ignite a fire that would burn across the stars. They stormed the outpost with precision, the Zorath caught completely off guard. The sound of blaster fire and explosions filled the air as the human force pushed forward, clearing room after room. The few Zorath soldiers that remained on-site fought with vicious determination, but it was no match for the sheer grit and resolve of the humans who had lived through the worst of times. Kane's team reached the command center, the heart of the outpost. Inside, a small group of Zorath officers stood huddled around a control table, their eyes wide with surprise at the sudden intrusion. Without hesitation, Kane barked orders, and her team took out the remaining guards with lethal efficiency. As Kane approached the central console, her heart skipped a beat. The display showed more than just military information. It displayed a map of the galaxy, a network of systems under Zorath control, and several points marked with a disturbing red hue. "What is this?" Kane muttered, leaning closer. "They're planning something." Before she could delve deeper into the data, a tremor shook the room. A voice boomed from the comms, sharp and authoritative. "This is Admiral Vozar of the Zorath Dominion. You will surrender immediately, or we will destroy your fleet." Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. "Not today, Vozar," she said, turning to her team. "Let's finish this." The Zorath would learn quickly. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were about to start a war the galaxy would never forget. The strike on the Zorath outpost was swift, brutal, and exactly what the rebellion needed. Within hours, Kane's message spread like wildfire through the galaxy. For the first time in years, the oppressed planets felt a glimmer of hope, a fleeting promise that perhaps they were not alone, and perhaps the Zorath could be defeated. Kane stood on the bridge of the eclipse, eyes scanning the new data that flooded in after their raid. The fleet was scattered and small, but it was a fleet nonetheless. A coalition of worlds, each suffering under the heel of the Zorath, had begun to rise in defiance. Resistance cells, once isolated and afraid, now began to link up. Kane could feel the shift, the weight of history shifting on its axis. It was only a matter of time before the rebellion spread further, but she knew this was just the beginning. "We've created a firestorm," said Commander Tristan Vale, standing beside her. His tone was tense, but his eyes reflected something close to admiration. "We've got contact from the Free Worlds Coalition. They want us to lead." Kane's gaze flicked over to the comm screen, where the image of a grizzled human commander appeared. The man's face was scared from years of fighting, but his eyes were filled with determination. "This is Commander Jorlin of the Free Worlds. Admiral Kane, your victory has inspired us all. We've got a fleet ready to fight. It's time to take the fight to the Zorath, before they can crush us." Kane straightened, her pulse quickening. The coalition was a diverse mix of species: humans, Threxians, Vornk, and other oppressed races, but all were united by a single goal: to end the Zorath Dominion's reign of terror. Yet despite their shared hatred for the invaders, there was something Kane knew would pose the greatest challenge: unity. The various factions had their own priorities, and trust was still a distant dream. "I'll need to meet with your leaders," Kane said, her voice steady. "We can't afford to waste time fighting among ourselves." Jorlin's image nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, Admiral. But beware, there's a shadow within the coalition. Some factions don't want to fight at all. They want to negotiate with the Zorath. They think they can coexist." Kane's lips thinned. She'd heard whispers of such voices in the past. Pacifist factions who believed that appeasing the Zorath might bring peace, but Kane had never been one to make deals with tyrants. Not after what happened to Earth. Then we'll make them see reason, one way or another. No more negotiations. The call ended, and the bridge returned to its usual quiet hum. Kane's mind was already racing with the implications of this new alliance. If they could unite, if they could channel this newfound hope, they might just stand a chance. But there was no guarantee. The Zorath would retaliate soon. If they didn't strike first, they would soon become the hunted. The journey to the Coalition's hidden stronghold on a neutral moon took longer than expected. The various factions' leaders came together in a rare meeting, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. The humans and Threxians sat at the same table as the Vornk, a species of hulking insectoid warriors. Old wounds ran deep between them, and the scars of war could still be seen in their eyes. Kane knew that unity wouldn't come easily. In the war room, she addressed the assembled leaders. "We're at a crossroads," she began, her voice unwavering. "We can sit here and argue about our differences, or we can make the Zorath pay for every world they've destroyed. A tall, imposing Phyrexian general, Chorus, spoke up first. "We've lost everything to the Zoreth. My people won't rest until they're crushed. But your forces, they're small. Can we really defeat the Zoreth with this?" His eyes narrowed as he scanned the gathered leaders. Kane's lips curled into a tight smile. "We're small, but we got something they don't. The element of surprise. The Zoreth are complacent. They've been in power too long. We don't need an overwhelming force. We need tactics and a united front." Another leader, a Vornk female named Soreth, stood. Her mandibles clicked as she spoke. "The Vornk are with you, human. But we don't trust the Phyrexians. If we march together, we must leave old grudges behind." Kane nodded. "I'll lead the charge. You follow, or you don't." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over the leaders. Kane wasn't asking for trust. She was demanding action. The rebellion had no time for hesitation or division. At last, the leaders looked among themselves, each weighing the costs and the potential gains. Finally, Jorlim spoke, his voice low but resolute. "We will follow your lead, Admiral. Together." Kane looked at each of them, feeling the gravity of what was about to happen. They had crossed the point of no return. There would be no turning back. "Then let's make history," Kane said, her voice filled with purpose. "We'll hit the Zoreth where it hurts. The rebellion starts now." The alliance was forged in fire, and with it, the first strike against the Zoreth was set into motion. It was only a matter of time before the battle would begin. Humanity's first true test of strength, and the galaxy's last hope for liberation. The combined fleet of the Free Worlds Coalition set course for the heart of the Zoreth Dominion, and Kane's resolve hardened with every passing minute. This mission was not just another skirmish. It was the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, one that would either mark the dawn of freedom or the final death knell of hope. The stakes had never been higher, and Kane knew that failure was not an option. Too many lives hung in the balance. The plan was simple yet daring. Strike at the Zoreth's central command hub located on their fortress planet, Nezar-9, a heavily fortified world that housed the Dominion's core military leadership. The idea was to disrupt their communications and command structure, causing chaos that would throw the Zoreth into disarray. But the risks were immense. Nezar-9 was well defended, and the Zoreth had already begun to mobilize their forces in retaliation for the earlier attack on their outpost. Kane paced the command deck of the Eclipse, her fingers twitching nervously at her sides. Her thoughts were consumed with the enormity of what was ahead. The fleet had trained and prepared for months, but no one could predict how the Zoreth would respond. Would they underestimate the human resolve? Or would they wipe them out before the first shot was fired? "Admiral, we're approaching the outer rim of Nezar-9's defense perimeter," said Lieutenant Zara, her voice steady, but tinged with concern. "We're in range of their sensors. The clock is ticking." Kane took a deep breath. This was it. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. She gave a quick nod. "Initiate the cloaking systems. Full speed ahead. We hit them fast and hard. No time for hesitation." The Eclipse and its fleet of rebels moved with surgical precision, ducking behind asteroids and using the cover of dark space to conceal their approach. The Zoreth had deployed their most advanced detection grids, but the humans had learned to adapt. The new technology they had developed, a mix of stolen Zoreth tech and human ingenuity, allowed their ships to blend into the blackness of space almost perfectly. As they closed in on Nezar-9's atmosphere, Kane's comms buzzed with an encrypted transmission. It was Jorlin. "We've hit a snag." Jorlin's voice crackled through the line. "We've been detected. Zoreth patrols are converging on our position. We've lost the element of surprise." Kane's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. Without surprise, their chances of success diminished drastically. The Zoreth had overwhelming firepower, and they would no doubt flood the battlefield with reinforcements. "Damn it," Kane muttered, but her voice was calm. "We don't retreat. We push forward. All ships, weapons hot. We're taking down Nezar-9's command center, no matter what. The fleet surged forward into the heart of the Zoreth defenses, their cloaking systems failing to keep them hidden any longer. The first Zoreth warships appeared on sensors, their massive hulls bristling with deadly energy weapons. Kane didn't flinch. She had trained her fleet for moments like this. "Brace for impact," she ordered. The battle erupted instantly. The sound of energy blasts filled the air as the Eclipse and its allied ships exchanged fire with the Zoreth. Massive explosions lit up the darkness as enemy warships were struck, their shields flaring before collapsing under the human assault. But the Zoreth responded with deadly force. Their flagship, the Sovereign Tyrant, fired a broadside that slammed into one of the smaller human vessels, sending it into a tumbling wreckage of metal and flame. Kane's heart tightened, but she remained focused. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Zoreth flagship. We need to disable their command center." Her fleet roared forward, the human ships fighting with a fierce determination that the Zoreth had not anticipated. Every strike was driven by the memory of Earth's fall, by the lives lost, and by the hope that this rebellion would bring justice to a galaxy long oppressed. The Eclipse tore through the Zoreth's defenses with brutal efficiency, its weapons striking enemy ships with pinpoint accuracy. Yet despite the damage, the Zoreth were relentless. More ships dropped out of hyperspace, pouring into the fray like a flood of steel and fire. Kane's eyes narrowed as she watched the battle unfold. The Zoreth had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now they would pay the price. "Admiral, we've reached the planetary defenses," Lieutenant Zara reported, her voice tense. "We're going to need to breach their planetary shields before we can get a direct hit on the command center." Kane's jaw clenched. The shields around Nezar-9 were some of the most advanced in the galaxy. But she knew the human fleet had a secret weapon, an experimental pulse bomb that could pierce even the most formidable barriers. The cost of deploying it would be steep, but it was their only shot at victory. "Deploy the pulse bomb," Kane ordered, her voice low but unwavering. The pulse bomb was launched from the Eclipse, its trajectory arcing toward Nezar-9's shield generators. The enemy ships intensified their fire, but the humans pushed through, unwilling to back down. Seconds later, the pulse bomb detonated with a blinding flash of energy. The shields surrounding Nezar-9 flickered and collapsed under the force of the blast, leaving the command center vulnerable to attack. "We have a window," Kane shouted. "All ships, full assault." Now, the final push had begun. The Zoreth would learn, at last, that humanity would never bow to their tyranny. The pulse bomb's explosion resonated through space like a shockwave of rebirth, and for a fleeting moment, the tide of battle shifted. The Zoreth's shields collapsed, exposing the heart of Nezar-9 to the fury of the human fleet. The Eclipse led the charge, its weapons blazing as it carved a path through the remaining defenses. Kane stood at the command center, her eyes burning with unrelenting determination. "Admiral," Lieutenant Zora's voice cut through the chaos. "We've cleared the outer defenses. We've got a clear shot at the command hub, but Zoreth reinforcements are incoming. They're already deploying another wave." Kane gritted her teeth. The window was closing, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. She turned to face her officers, her gaze locking onto each one. "This is it. We break them here, or they break us. No hesitation. Push forward. We take that command hub, no matter the cost." The fleet roared forward, the remaining Zoreth warships scrabbling to respond, but their coordination was fractured, their command structure faltering. The humans had taken the initiative, something the Zoreth had not expected. Chaos spread among their ranks as the Eclipse led the charge, cutting through the battlefield with calculated precision. Kane had seen nothing like it before. The unity of purpose, the fire in the eyes of her crew, the knowledge that every person aboard was fighting for something greater than themselves. The spark of hope had ignited, and it would not be extinguished. Releasing attack drones, Zara announced, "We'll breach the command hub's defenses from all sides." The Eclipse deployed a swarm of agile drones that darted through the battlefield like a cloud of angry wasps. They struck at the Zoreth command hub, bypassing the remaining defensive systems, their weapons locking onto weak points. Explosions tore through the enemy's outer walls as the drones carved their way into the heart of the facility. Kane watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming next. The Zoreth, desperate to regain control, would soon unleash their most devastating weapon, the Dreadnought-class supercarrier. She'd seen the design before, an overwhelming force that could wipe out entire fleets with a single volley. But the Zoreth were running out of time. The Eclipse and its fleet had already gained too much ground. "Admiral, we've breached their internal defenses," Zora called out, her voice thick with urgency. "We're inside the command hub. We're going to need a few minutes to disable their central control." Kane nodded, her mind already calculating their next move. "Keep your fire on them. Don't let up. We got to hold the line while we finish this." The ship shook violently as a Zoreth destroyer fired on them from a flanking position. The Eclipse swerved, narrowly avoiding the blast. Another ship, smaller but faster, slipped through their defensive perimeter and came at them head-on. "Zara, brace for impact." Kane barked, gripping the edge of her command station. The crew scrambled to respond, and the Eclipse staggered under the force of the strike. Red lights flashed across the command deck, signaling damage to the portside shields. But the ship held, and the crew's resolve remained unbroken. "Admiral," a voice came through the comms. "This is Commander Jorlin. We've got their dreadnought in sight. If we don't act now, it'll be over." Kane's gaze hardened. The dreadnought was their last threat. The Zoreth had sent it to reclaim control. But the ship was not invincible. It was vulnerable if they could hit it fast enough. "Jorlin, give us everything you've got," Kane commanded. "Hit it with everything. We'll finish the command hub and then turn to support you." "Acknowledged," Jorlin replied, his voice steely with determination. The combined fleet of humans and their allies fired in unison, launching a devastating barrage at the Zoreth dreadnought. Waves of energy and projectiles slammed into the massive ship, scoring deep gouges into its hull. The Zoreth retaliated with full force, but the human fleet was relentless. The Zoreth had underestimated their determination, and the consequences were dire. Inside the command hub, Zara's team worked furiously to shut down the Zoreth's central control systems. Every moment was a race against time. If they failed, the Zoreth would retaliate with unimaginable force, and all their progress would be lost. "Almost there," Zara said, her voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." Kane held her breath. Every fiber of her being was focused on the outcome. The weight of the galaxy's hope rested on their shoulders. If they succeeded, the Zoreth would lose their grip on power. If they failed, it would all be for nothing. Finally, with a sharp hiss of static, Zora's voice rang out in triumph. "We've done it, Admiral. The control hub is offline. The Zoreth command network is down." Cheers erupted on the Eclipse as the crew realized they had achieved the impossible. The command hub was crippled, and with it, the heart of the Zoreth's dominance. But the war was far from over. The dreadnought was still a threat, and the Zoreth would not surrender easily. The battle for Nizar 9 had been won, but the fight for the galaxy had only just begun. The cheers aboard the Eclipse were short-lived. While the command hub was disabled, the battle was far from over. The Zoreth dreadnought, though battered, still loomed on the horizon like a beast waiting to strike. It had taken everything the human fleet had to break through the Zoreth defenses, and now they would need to give everything they had left to finish the job. Kane stood tall, her expression hard as she surveyed the battlefield. She could see the sovereign tyrant, the Zoreth flagship, still fighting valiantly. Its weapons lashed out, cutting down the smaller ships around it. But it was the dreadnought that commanded her attention now. The massive ship was still operational, and its cannons could obliterate the human fleet with a single shot. "Admiral," Zara's voice was urgent. The dreadnought is preparing to fire its main weapon. It's targeting the heart of our fleet. Kane's mind raced. They had no time to waste. The dreadnought's weapon was powerful enough to wipe out half their forces in one shot. If they couldn't disable it, their victory would be fleeting. Zara, how long until we're in range of its engines? Kane asked, her voice steady but intense. 20 minutes, Admiral. But Zara hesitated. We're going to take heavy fire trying to close the distance. Make it 10, Kane cut in, the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. We have to close the gap. Give me everything we've got. Without another word, Zara relayed the orders. The Eclipse surged forward, weaving through the chaos of the battle, taking evasive maneuvers to avoid the deadly fire of the dreadnought and the remaining Zorath warships. The human fleet followed, their ships moving in tight formation, a united front of defiance. Kane's mind was laser-focused on the task at hand. She watched as enemy ships detonated in fiery explosions, the sheer will of the humans pushing them forward. But the Zorath were relentless. The dreadnought opened fire, sending a devastating barrage of energy blasts that streaked across the battlefield. One human ship was hit, sending it spiraling into the void, its crew lost in an instant. Admiral, Zara shouted, we can't hold this much longer. Their firepower is too much. Don't stop. Kane snapped, her voice unwavering. We've been through worse, and we've survived. We will finish this. With the Eclipse leading the charge, the human fleet reached the dreadnought's engine section, and Kane issued the order to deploy their last remaining experimental torpedoes, warheads designed to bypass even the most heavily shielded targets. The fleet's fighters swooped in, firing distraction shots at the Zorath ship's flanks, buying enough time for the torpedoes to lock onto their target. Kane's fingers tightened around the console as the torpedoes launched in unison, their warheads streaking through the chaos toward the dreadnought. The enemy's weapons fired back, but the human fighters held the line, sacrificing themselves to give the torpedoes a clear path. Moments later, the torpedoes struck. The dreadnought's engine section erupted in a brilliant flash of light as the warheads made contact, tearing through the ship's core. The entire ship shook as the blast reverberated outward, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to freeze. Then the dreadnought's massive form began to break apart. The once mighty Zorath vessel cracked down the middle, its hull buckling under the catastrophic damage. The shockwave from the explosion sent enemy ships scattering, and the dreadnought's massive cannons fell silent. It's down, Zara breathed, the tension in her voice giving way to disbelief. Kane let out a slow breath. The dreadnought was gone, but the Zorath forces were still formidable. The battle raged on, and the sovereign tyrant was now the last threat standing. Kane knew they had to end it before the remaining Zorath reinforcements arrived. Target the flagship, Kane commanded. We finish this now. The remaining ships of the human fleet focused all their fire on the sovereign tyrant. The Zorath flagship, though crippled, still fought fiercely, its weapons lashing out in every direction. But without the support of their superweapon, their fate was sealed. The Eclipse led the charge once more, its weapons pounding the Zorath flagship with relentless force. The Zorath retaliated with everything they had left, but the human fleet's unity, determination, and innovation were more than a match for their overwhelming power. Piece by piece, the sovereign tyrant began to fall apart, its shields crumbling under the barrage. Finally, with a final, deafening explosion, the sovereign tyrant was no more. The Zorath flagship was reduced to a smoldering wreck, its massive hull disintegrating in the vacuum of space. The remaining Zorath warships, leaderless and disorganized, began to retreat. The human fleet let out a collective cheer as the last of the Zorath forces withdrew. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought down the Zorath Dominion's most powerful weapon and crippled their command structure. Kane stood on the command deck of the Eclipse, her heart still pounding, but her eyes filled with a quiet pride. The battle for Nezar 9 was won, But the war was far from over. The Zoreth had been beaten, but there were still many more battles to fight. And in the distance, a new hope was taking root. In the aftermath of the decisive victory at Nezar-9, the human fleet stood victorious. The once feared Zoreth Dominion, their command structure shattered and their flagship reduced to rubble, was in disarray. But the war was not yet over. There were still pockets of resistance scattered throughout the galaxy, and the human forces knew the battle had only just begun. Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, looking out into the vast expanse of space. The remnants of the Zoreth fleet limped away, their retreating ships disappearing into the darkness, leaving the human fleet with a temporary calm. The crew, exhausted from the brutal fight, began to regroup and process the enormity of what had just occurred. Nezar-9 had been a turning point, but it was only one victory in a much larger war. Kane's eyes narrowed as her mind turned to the next challenge. Despite the defeat of the Dreadnought and the Sovereign Tyrant, there were still millions of Zoreth soldiers on the ground, and more importantly, their secret weapon, the Zoreth Supreme, remained at large. If humanity was to win this war, they would have to face the true heart of the enemy's power. "Admiral, we've received a transmission from the Council." Lieutenant Zora's voice interrupted her thoughts. "They want to speak with you." Kane straightened, her posture regaining its sharpness. "Put it through." The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing the faces of the members of the Galactic Council. Humans, aliens, and other sentient species that had joined the resistance against the Zoreth. But it was the face of Counselor Varric, the leader of the alien Trideri, who dominated the screen. His expression was a mix of admiration and concern. "Admiral Kane," Varric began, his deep voice resonating with authority, "I speak on behalf of the Council. The victory at Nezar-9 has sent shockwaves through the galaxy. But we are not blind to the gravity of the situation. The Zoreth Supreme is still out there, and the remnants of their fleet could regroup. We must act swiftly if we are to ensure this victory is not short-lived." Kane nodded, her gaze steady. "We know the Supreme is still a threat, but we've broken their command structure. Their strength is crumbling. What's more, the resistance is growing. The humans have inspired new alliances across the galaxy. We are not alone in this fight." The other council members murmured in agreement, their faces brightening with renewed hope. But Varric's expression remained cautious. "We have heard rumors," Varric said, his voice lowering. "Whispers from the fringes of Zoreth space. There are those who believe the Supreme is not just a military leader. Some say the Supreme possesses power beyond anything we've ever faced, something that could alter the very fabric of the galaxy." A shiver ran down Kane's spine. The Zoreth Supreme had always been a shadowy figure, an enigma that no one fully understood. But if these rumors were true, "We need to find the Supreme," Kane said, her voice resolute. "We must eliminate this threat before it can grow stronger, no matter what it takes." Varric nodded gravely. "We will provide you with everything we can. The resistance is ready to lend its strength. But I must caution you, Admiral, this will not be easy. We are heading into uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively." Kane's resolve hardened. She had faced impossible odds before and triumphed. This new challenge, whatever it was, would not break her or her fleet. "We've come this far. The Zoreth have underestimated humanity at every turn. We will not allow them to win." With a final exchange of words, the transmission ended, and Kane turned to her officers, her eyes filled with the determination that had brought them this far. "Prepare the fleet," Kane ordered. "We're going after the Supreme." The Eclipse and its fleet began their preparations, gathering allies and resources for the next phase of the campaign. The path forward was unclear, the stakes higher than ever before, but the hope humanity had kindled was growing brighter with each passing day. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. Now, they would take the fight to the very heart of the Zoreth Dominion. As the fleet set course for the Zoreth's inner territories, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something monumental. The battle for the galaxy had not been won in a single strike, and their victory at Nezarnine was only the beginning of what would become a defining moment in history. The galaxy was waking up, and humanity was leading the charge. The last remnants of the Zorith Dominion had retreated into the unknown, and as the human fleet set its course toward the heart of enemy territory, the hope they had brought to the galaxy would burn brighter than ever before. The journey into the heart of Zorith territory was fraught with danger. The human fleet, bolstered by a growing alliance of resistance forces, pushed deeper into enemy space, the distant stars now their only guide. The Zorith had fallen back to their most heavily fortified systems, the places where their supreme leader, the enigma that was both feared and revered, was rumored to hide. The Eclipse led the charge, its sleek hull cutting through the darkness with quiet resolve. Admiral Kane stood at the bridge, eyes scanning the star maps, the crew's whispers barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. They had crossed into the Zorith-controlled sector, a barren stretch of space, far from the galactic center, where the war had first begun. "Admiral," Zara said, her voice betraying a hint of unease, "we've detected multiple enemy ships ahead. Their readings are off the charts, highly concentrated defense forces. This could be a trap." Kane's fingers tightened around the edge of the command console. The Zorith were no strangers to traps. The entire campaign had been shaped by deception, and this could very well be another scheme to draw them into a killing zone. "We're not turning back," Kane said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "If this is a trap, we walk right into it. But we have to go. For humanity, for the galaxy." Zara exchanged a glance with her officers, whom nodded in silent agreement. The Eclipse and the fleet powered on, moving deeper into the heart of darkness. As the ships neared the coordinates they had been given, an eerie silence seemed to fall across the space around them. The stars appeared dimmer, as if the very fabric of the universe had become heavy with dread. It was a graveyard of dead suns, disruptions in the natural order that only the Zorith could create. Then, without warning, the space ahead of them exploded with fire. Dozens of Zorith warships emerged from the shadows, their dark forms cutting across the stars like ravenous predators. The resistance ships, previously acting as reinforcements, scattered into evasive maneuvers, but it was clear that the human fleet was outnumbered. "Shields up, weapons online," Kane shouted, her voice a calm storm of authority. "Prepare to engage." The battle erupted around them as the fleet began to engage. The Zorith ships launched volleys of energy beams, their immense firepower slamming into the human fleet's shields, causing them to flare brightly. The resistance fighters darted through the chaos, launching coordinated attacks against the Zorith cruisers, but they were like wolves attacking a much larger beast. Kane's heart beat loudly in her chest, but she remained unshaken, watching as her officers acted with a precision born of years of combat. They were far from home, far from reinforcements, but they fought with the unity and tenacity that only humanity could bring to the battlefield. "Admiral, we've got a problem," Zora called out, her voice tinged with panic. "The Zorith flagship, it's charging its main cannon." Kane's eyes shot to the sensor readouts, and her stomach tightened. The Sovereign Tyrant had been destroyed, but the Zorith had another weapon. A colossal ship, even more dangerous, lurking in the depths of their fleet. This was the real force behind their empire, the ship that housed their supreme leader. "Evasive maneuvers," Kane ordered. "Deploy all remaining fighters. We have to buy time." Her voice was unwavering, but the truth was clear. The human fleet was on the edge of annihilation. There was no turning back now. Suddenly, the lights flickered on the Eclipse as a massive surge of energy tore through the battlefield. The Zorith flagship, the Dread Sovereign, unleashed its deadly weapon, an enormous beam of concentrated energy that cut through the void like a knife. It collided with one of the human resistance ships, sending it into a spiral of fiery destruction. "No," Zora shouted, her eyes wide in disbelief. But there was no time to mourn. Kane's mind raced as she weighed their options. She had known this was coming, an all-out assault on the heart of the Zorth Empire. But even she had underestimated the power of the Dread Sovereign. "We got to disable that ship before it does more damage," Kane said, her voice cold with resolve. "Zara, prepare the boarding team. We're going after the Supreme." Zora looked at her in shock. "Boarding, Admiral. That's suicide." "We're not getting another chance," Kane replied, turning to face her. "We have to end this here. Now." The plan was simple but deadly. The Eclipse would provide cover for the remaining fleet, and a small boarding party would infiltrate the Dread Sovereign, the Zorith flagship, using a cloaking system that could mask their approach. The goal was to reach the heart of the ship, find the Zorith Supreme, and neutralize the leader who had been the true source of the Empire's monstrous power. Kane could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. To strike directly at the Zorith Supreme was their only chance, but it could also be their last. As the fleet continued to engage the Zorith forces, the human soldiers aboard the Eclipse began preparing for their final mission. This was no longer just about victory or defeat. It was about sending a message that would echo across the stars. Humanity would never surrender, never be cowed, and never let darkness take root in the galaxy. As the ships moved into position, a new resolve filled the hearts of the human fleet. They were not just soldiers in a war. They were the beacon of hope in the vast, endless night. The Eclipse surged forward, its engines pushing it through the turbulent battlefield, maneuvering between the explosions of distant ships. The Zorith flagship, Dread Sovereign, loomed in the distance, a colossal shadow surrounded by a ring of deadly destroyers and battleships. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Kane stood at the front of the command deck, her eyes hard and unflinching. There was no room for hesitation now. The plan was simple, but it was risky. The resistance fighters and the remaining human fleet would distract the Zorith forces, drawing their attention away from the cloaked assault team that would board the Dread Sovereign. "Zara," Kane said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Prepare the team. We'll need to be inside the Dread Sovereign in minutes. We can't afford to lose any time." Zara nodded, her face taut with determination. "Understood, Admiral. We're ready." In the belly of the Eclipse, the boarding team gathered in a darkened hangar. These men and women, pilots, soldiers, engineers, were the best humanity had to offer. They had fought on countless fronts, surviving impossible odds, and now they were about to make their final push. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the Zorith flagship, find the Zorith Supreme, and end the war once and for all. As the shuttle doors closed, Kane joined the team. She could feel the weight of their collective resolve. The humans who stood here today were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for every soul in the galaxy who had ever dared to hope for a better future. This mission, this fight, was bigger than them all. The shuttle launched, cloaked from the enemy sensors, cutting through the battlefield with lethal precision. Around them, the Eclipse and the remaining fleet engaged in a brutal fight against the Zorith armée. Flashes of energy and fire lit up the darkness, but the shuttle sailed on, undetected. Kane's heart pounded as they neared the Dread Sovereign. The ship's massive form loomed larger with every passing moment, its shields rippling with energy. She knew that the clock was ticking. Every second spent outside the flagship could mean the difference between life and death. "Prepare for docking," Kane ordered as the shuttle closed in on the enemy ship. "We need to get in and out fast. No mistakes." The shuttle made contact with the outer hull of the Dread Sovereign, its docking clamps latching onto the sleek surface with a soft hiss. The doors opened, revealing the dimly lit corridor, filled with the hum of alien technology and the faint sounds of Zorith soldiers moving in the distance. The team moved swiftly, their weapons drawn, their movements precise. They were ghosts in the night, silent and lethal. Kane led the charge, her mind focused on the task at hand. She had faced impossible odds before, But this time was different. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of every living being who had ever dreamed of freedom. As they moved deeper into the heart of the ship, the Zorath forces began to realize that something was wrong. The alarm bells rang through the corridors, and the once pristine halls of the Dread Sovereign began to shake with the sound of soldiers rushing to intercept the boarding party. Kane's team fought with the ferocity of the cornered, cutting through wave after wave of Zorath soldiers. Their movements were fluid, coordinated, perfectly in sync with the training they had received. The Dread Sovereign was an impenetrable fortress, but the humans were relentless, cutting a path through the heart of the ship. Finally, they reached the central chamber, the inner sanctum of the Zorath Supreme. The massive doors before them opened with a hiss, revealing a darkened room bathed in an eerie purple glow. At the center of the room, seated on a throne of twisted metal and bone, was the Zorath Supreme. His presence was overwhelming, radiating a cold, inhuman power. The Zorath Supreme looked up at them, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "So the humans have come to challenge me," he intoned, his voice a low, rumbling growl. "You are too late. The galaxy is mine. The war is already won." Kane stepped forward, her pulse steady. "The war ends today." The Zorath Supreme laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can defeat me? I have seen the future. I am its master." But Kane's voice was unshaken. "The future isn't yours to control. It belongs to those who fight for it." Without warning, the battle erupted. The Zorath Supreme unleashed waves of destructive energy, but Kane and her team were ready. Their weapons fired in unison, each shot cutting through the dark power of the Zorath. The Supreme was powerful, but humanity had something the Zorath had never understood: hope. Hope that no power, no force, could ever extinguish. As the final blows were struck, the Zorath Supreme let out a final, deafening roar. The chamber trembled, and the ship's systems began to fail. The human team stood victorious, breathing heavily, the weight of their victory sinking in. Outside, the Eclipse and the fleet were still locked in battle, but the turning point had come. The Zorath Empire, without its leader, crumbled. The galaxy was free. As Kane stood over the fallen Supreme, she knew one thing for certain: humanity had not only brought light to the darkness, they had become it.